Okay.
Okay, I think we're live. Just let me check. Hi, Gail. Yes, we're live, and it is working. Okay, I think we're live. Okay, I gotta turn it off. There we go. Great. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm just so happy to be here. Really, it's such a privilege to talk to you.
Thank you.
Thanks. Sorry?
The privilege is mine.
Oh, thanks. I wanted to, well, actually, before we even introduce you and talk about your work, I wonder if you wouldn't mind leading us in a centering practice, because it just helps me, begin these conversations in anything, kind of the way.
Okay, I'd love to. So what I would invite everyone to do is to lower your gaze or close your eyes if you're comfortable. And I'm going to read a poem to you that hopefully we can all relate to and resonate with. I think it's relevant to what's going on around us, what's going on environmentally, what's going on between us. So I'll start with that, and we can just start it as our contemplation. It's called Joshua Trees Know. Joshua trees know each other. Root systems connecting across vibrational sand. Science says Joshua trees hum, sing together. Perhaps amongst their mycelium roots or limb to limb. Mystery. Whatever happens to one happens to all. Evolved consciousness, oneness. Joshua trees know. How do we awaken to this too? So just sit with that for a moment. And when you're ready, we can return our focus to our Facebook Live conversation.
Okay, and I'm still here. I do see that my video has gone down. I think it's my internet. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, as long as you can hear me, then and we can see you. That's what we're here for, so.
Okay.
I know that I met you had written for Melanie Klein's book. I think we both contributed to. We
did.
That incredible series. So that was great to meet you then, and let's following you. I'm just so excited to see the reaction to this book, Restorative Yoga for Ethnic and Race-Based Stress and Trauma. And I wonder if you could just talk about yourself a little bit, your background. Can you share a little bit with us?
Yes, I am a psychologist by training and by profession. I've been practicing yoga for 50 years, all of my adult life. I started right after I graduated from college, and it really has been a transformative practice for me. The person who taught me yoga, we were not learning yoga the way it's taught these days. It would be called, if there was a name for it, then accessible yoga. Anybody could do it.
Uh-huh.
And the person who was teaching me, actually, as it turns out, was a disciple of Paramahansa Yogananda. I did not know that at the time. But I attribute my love of the practice and my consistency with it, because it was a home practice then. We only went to a class once a week. It was at the Art Institute where I lived. And so I cultivated a home practice from the beginning. That was the way it was taught. And it was a very gentle practice. There was nothing, no gymnastics, no vinyasa, none of that existed at the time. And so I have stayed with it. And as a psychologist, the practices of yoga, not just asana practice, but the philosophy and the psychology and the contemplative practices are consistent with the work that I do in my attempt to support people in engaging in self-study, understanding that they have an inner life beyond their physical body. And so it just fit within the work that I do and within my own psychology. I took yoga teacher training the same reason most people do, which is I wanted to learn more about my practice. I said I didn't want to teach. So a lot of people say that. I ended up teaching because I learned about restorative yoga, which is, again, a perfect fit for the work that I do. So I taught restorative yoga and eventually became certified as a yoga therapist, and have taught in universities and in hospital settings people how to use yoga as a therapeutic healing technique. And then I wrote this book.
Yeah. And I know you're also the president of the Black Yoga Teachers Alliance, right?
I am, yeah. In January, I became the president, yes.
So I hear, look, people are saying that my sound isn't that clear. Can you hear me okay?
It's not as clear as it could be.
Okay, just switch mics. I was hoping that would help. I know that my video is not working. So I think it could be just this area right now. We're having, there's fires nearby. And I know that just I have best internet possible. Anyway, we'll just keep going. As long as we can hear you and that you can hear me, hopefully it's okay. But I appreciate your story, and I want to say how much I enjoyed reading it. I didn't finish the book, but I read at least that part. I got to read about your sharing. I thought it was really beautiful because I know, I'm working on a second book right now, and it's hard to know how much to share, and to really expose yourself in that way.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and you tell a story about middle school. That was quite powerful, and I really appreciate also the way you mentioned something in that story about how racism, not only did it affect you, but you reflected on how it affected those people that were being racist, or people in that story too. I thought that was really profound to look at how racism affects all of us, the universality.
Yes. And because we were children, for those of you who haven't read the book, my hypothesis is that we are all impacted by race-based stress and trauma, whether you are directly impacted, indirectly impacted, or unwittingly or knowingly contributing to the people based on race. So the book is an invitation really to self-study, to begin to take a deep dive into what is my personal relationship, not just Gail, all of us, what is my personal relationship to issues of race and ethnicity, starting with my own, not with other people's. But, do I think about this? How am I impacted? If I'm not impacted, why is that? If I don't think about that, why is that? We live in a racialized culture. We all have an ethnic, cultural, and racial identity. And we're all having different experiences in relationship to our own identities here. And so that's why I invite people to take a look. And in middle school, when I had my first encounter with a race-related events, I wouldn't even, we were kids, I wouldn't call them racist. They were doing what the culture supported. Segregation was the law at the time. And it was beyond just being a custom. And so without doing a spoiler alert, I tell a story of how I was invited to a school dance by one of the boys in the class. I was the only Black child in the classroom. And when his father picked me up, he and his father picked me up to go to the dance, I could see this look on his father's face. I didn't know what it was, but I eventually realized what it was. And this was during a time when, again, as I said, segregation was still the law. And we were a military family living on a military base. And so those laws did not apply to us, but the military was still racially conflicted, we'll put it that way. Anyway, so we go to this dance and we had a great time. And the next day when I went to school, I was being shunned by the entire class. And that lasted for a year until my mother said, okay, enough, we're leaving. We're not going to stay here. And she stopped traveling with my father at that point to protect her children. And so I ask myself in telling the story, I wonder if the kids even remember it. I wonder if they knew why they were doing what they did. My assumption is that the little boy's father told him something that made it clear to him that there was something wrong with being associated with me. I didn't know that at the time. I was just hurt, really hurt. So.
That's what I thought was beautiful about the way you told this story. Can you hear me okay?
No, you're breaking up.
Yeah, it's really frustrating, my internet, and I have the best I could possibly have, but it seems like, here, I'm going to turn my camera off altogether.
Okay.
So, Can you hear me?
A little bit.
You can see.
You
Can
still
okay?
sound a little bit underwater, but keep.
Underwater. Okay.
Yeah, I can try.
I'm going to try my. One sec. Sorry about this, everybody. This is my life right now. Is tech. Okay, can you hear me? Is it better?
It's better. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I think as long as we can see you, now we can see you, and you can hear me. That's the way to do this. If you don't mind that, and if you can hear me, okay.
We'll just keep talking. If you move in and out, I'll let you know.
What I was going to say about that story that I thought was just so interesting to me was kind of the unknown. You know, how as a child you just don't understand why these things are happening, and actually that story really left me with a lot of questions. Like, well, what happened? You know, what really happened? Why all of a sudden would they not talk to you? But anyway, I think that's the point. You know, is that the questions are there, and that's so traumatic for children, and for all of us. You know, it's like, you know, we're so deeply affected by these things, and I think we don't talk about it enough. So I just really appreciate your sharing of that.
And it's interesting hearing your response to that, because that was how I felt. I didn't know what happened. It took me years to figure it out. One of the manifestations of, I guess it's a manifestation of racial stress and trauma for people directly impacted, is we don't share the story. We don't tell our parents. We don't tell the teacher. We don't tell anybody because we feel protective. It's a painful experience, and in some ways shameful. You feel shamed not the people who are doing the shaming. And so you keep it to yourself. And so that's one of the reasons I say in that introductory piece, we need to tell our stories to each other, not just hold them in, maintain the secrecy, and that's all of us.
Yeah.
See, those little white kids, if they remembered this event, and I doubt that it had the impact on them that it had on me, it couldn't have. If they remembered it well enough to repeat the story, there would be shame. How could we do that to someone?
Right.
You know, if you're conscious at all. But if we're practicing our principles and we're being truthful and honest, satya, we tell the story.
Right.
We share the story. If we're practicing ahimsa, we don't shame, blame, or criticize each other for the stories we share and tell.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's beautiful. I think I could relate personally to that as a gay man. The story of middle school, where I also struggled, and there was so much of that shame and confusion, and not able to talk to anybody, and not knowing what was going on. There's just so much confusion on my part. So,
and as children, we reach conclusions that are immature. Mine was, well, I don't know why, I guess it just don't like me. And I will tell you, to this day, under certain circumstances, I fall back on that. Well, I don't know why, they just don't like me.
They just don't like me.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then it's tempting to leave it there and not take it any further. I know it now. When I hear myself saying that, I don't let myself get away with it. And just leaving it there, I take it deeper. Yeah. What makes you think that? Right. Why are you personalizing this? And maybe it's true. Maybe they really don't like you. But
no, I have this similar reaction. I'm very, maybe it's common to feel that way, just when you hear about it. If you think someone's angry, if they're angry, or if you might have upset them in some way, I think I really struggle with that. And I think the more you put yourself out in the world, it's hard to, you're not going to please everybody. Not everyone is going to like you, and that's okay. So I'm trying to learn how to, look at my mind and why I go there and use it as a practice, which I think is what you're saying.
That is what I'm saying.
Yeah. I want to talk about the idea of restorative yoga in particular as a therapeutic strategy. So I was just let's see, you talk about on page 38, you talk about yoga in general. You utilize as a therapeutic strategy an opportunity to address the need to include self-care practices that are relevant to ethnic racial experience of stress and trauma. And you say they're not just asana-based, but include philosophical precepts and contemplative practices of yoga as well. But I guess maybe that wasn't the right quote to read, but what I'm curious about, I love that idea personally. I just love the idea of yoga as therapeutic approach to addressing trauma in general, and especially here we're talking about race-based trauma. But I'm curious about the, the restorative yoga in particular, and how you got there. It sounded like it was your personal experience that made that connection for you.
Actually, it was somewhat personal, but also my professional experience.
Right.
Restorative yoga, and as a practitioner of restorative yoga, I realized, I felt, this is an opportunity to be still enough to process all of that noise and agitation that one experiences when one is trying not to be still and trying not to listen to oneself. There you are. And I've experienced releases of stress and trauma. I've experienced memory that I didn't know was there. I've experienced emotions that I didn't know were there. And in the practice, you don't have to analyze any of that. It's not, see, stress and trauma are not cognitive experiences, they're embodied experiences. And when we can't or don't process the traumas and the stresses that we experience, and as race-based stress and trauma is ongoing, it's cumulative and it's recurrent. It's not a one-time event that happened that I might remember that I can work with. It's ongoing.
Yeah.
And so being able to rest gives the body an opportunity to renew itself, and it supports resilience. In restorative yoga, you're from the very first pose to the very last pose, you're not focused on the trauma. You're focused on stimulating the parasympathetic nervous system and evoking the relaxation response. And so when the mind and body come to stillness, stress releases. And you don't have to analyze it. You can if you choose, but that's not the practice.
Right. Okay, that's beautiful. I mean, you describe it so beautifully, and I have to say, I did. I had many experiences with restorative yoga, and I really over the last few years, I working with Sherry Clamp. I don't know if you know her, an orator.
Yes.
I studied with them. Yeah. And they trained me years ago, and I learned so much. But then I got to work privately with Sherry, who lives here in Santa Barbara, and I had, after my mother died 3 years ago, I had a real trauma response. And Sherry, I kind of went to her not knowing what to do, and she restorative yoga with me. And it was transformative. And I really didn't understand before that what you're describing.
Yes.
But it wasn't a practice that I was drawn to. I mean, I've been practicing for 30 years, and yet that wasn't something I naturally was drawn to, I think, because I'm energetic. And yet it was exactly what I needed. And I also needed that guidance to slow down and to really feel my feelings, which I think restorative yoga lends itself to in the way you describe it. And it's not, it's so therapeutic in that way, processing, like a healthy way to process our feelings.
And again, you're not doing it cognitively. The feelings are being processed.
Yeah.
The focus is on the breath. The focus is on rest, relaxation, renewal, comfort. We're not making any effort. And so the practice also balances out all of that effort that we're all engaged in. And it brings ease into our lives. And most of us need that practice.
Yeah.
Even though we're not attracted to it.
Right. Well, it's really,
yeah.
It's really hard. It's the hardest yoga I've done.
It is. It's a very advanced form of yoga because it really brings you into your skin.
Yeah.
And being in your skin that's of course where our authenticity lies, but it requires an internal focus, and we tend to be externally focused as a culture.
Right, and we've even made yoga externally focused.
That's right.
It's like we've turned it around, it seems to me. And that's why, honestly, my reaction to your book is that you're so humble, I would say, in making it very specific, but I feel like it's such a universal teaching that you've shared here, and I would just call this book yoga. You know what I mean?
Well, I'll tell you why I didn't.
Yeah.
It was intentional. It is universal. I talk about universal principles.
Yeah.
You do not have to practice yoga, know anything about yoga to benefit from this book. You do not have to be particularly interested in race-based stress and trauma to benefit from this book. But what I also know is that I think there was a lot of trauma-informed yoga information coming out.
Yeah.
But there was never any mention of the specific form of trauma, race-based trauma and stress. And that's where I did my research and took a deep dive. And also I have the experience. But I thought, no, this is specific. This is a form of stress and trauma that needs to be identified. We need to learn to talk, to say the word race. We need to talk about race. We need to talk about stress and trauma, and we need to do it in a way that is universal and non-confrontational, but we're confronting ourselves. We're taking a look at our own issues and sharing them. Writing the book, the hardest part about writing the book for me, and you may have had this experience in yours, was self-disclosure. That was hard. You have to make yourself vulnerable. You have to be willing to be vulnerable to enter into this conversation.
Yeah, exactly. That is the hardest part, I think. I'm struggling with that now. I'm working on my second book, and it's becoming much more personal. I think I've just gotten enjoying the writing process, I think, and I think I've let go of the reader of it. I'm worried now, looking back.
Yike.
But how has the reaction been to you? I mean, it looks amazing. From what I can tell online, looks like you've had incredibly positive reaction to that sharing.
Evidently. I mean, I was surprised as well. It was the hardest part. The first chapter, I think chapter 1 is called "The Wounds Heal, but the Scars Hurt." And I start by saying this was a scary thing for me to do, to step into this project, because I would have to reveal some of my own wounding, which means you have to revisit it and re-experience some of it, or I would bump into wounds that I didn't even know were still there. And that makes it difficult. And so I would bump into what you're talking about, the part of me that would say, oh my gosh, do I really want to say this? Oh my gosh, who's going to read this? Oh my gosh, what are people going to think? And so you sit with that. You sit with that. A dear friend actually, she's a writer, told me, she said, you meditate on that. Just meditate on it. When you bump into those blocks, just be with it.
But so in a way, like
practice,
that's the most, what'd you say?
That's the practice.
That's the practice, I think it's like one of the most powerful ways of teaching is by example and sharing your heart. That's how you really touch people, and that's what it sounds like. Well, I know that's what you've done. I mean, you've basically taken something personal and been able to transform it into this incredible teaching for all of us. I want to read some comments. Brittany saying, yes, Black people needed that validation.
Yes, we do.
That it is trauma and we can talk about it and heal. The book was beautifully written and such a blessing to me. I mean, I really thought that too, like you basically elevated the trauma. You like lifted it up. Which is so powerful. Like rather than hide it or not even, also not, you're not, what's the word? It's not like you're blaming.
I'm not pathologizing it. I'm not making it a problem, because it isn't. It is a normal, natural response, whatever your response is, to emotional injury. And whether you feel fear or anger or shame or guilt or whatever your experience is your response to the injury. If you fell down and broke your leg, it would hurt. You would probably not feel bad about that. You wouldn't blame yourself for the hurt. You might blame yourself for falling down, but but you would expect it to hurt.
Yeah.
Emotional injury is the same. In fact, the science shows that emotions and our physicality share the same neural pathway, which is why when your feelings get hurt, and they do, it really physically hurts. You feel it in your body.
Yeah.
Which is another reason restorative yoga is therapeutic, because it supports developing what we, in my business, call interoceptive awareness, meaning the awareness of what are my internal signals telling me. When you're exposed to ongoing, cumulative, recurrent stress and trauma, you learn to tune it out, and that's an adaptive response. So because
but
you
it
can't,
has an impact.
I mean, you can't be in pain 24/7 all of your whole entire life, and so you learn to ignore it. Sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. It's not true. Names can hurt you. Names can also heal you. And so that's why I talk about the important use of language, how we use language in our yoga teaching and in our practice. That I think that we need to be mindful, and I think it's a sacred practice to use language in a healing way, whether you're teaching yoga or not.
That's cool.
So.
Oh, you just thought, hold on. So just go back to, first you were talking about those emotions and how they're in the body. You know, like, is it Nikki Myers, you know, who says the issues are in our tissues?
In the tissues, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, that's what's so great about yoga, right? Like, that's how we can heal, is by realizing that connection. And I think in the West, it's like we just deny that somehow, but that's the basis of yoga, right? That the body and the emotions and the mind are all connected. And so doing these practices helps to bring stuff out, and helps us to address those feelings that have been manifested physically.
It has the potential to do that, yeah.
What?
It has the potential to do that. If you understand and recognize that all aspects of being, that it's a holistic practice, and that our physicality, our energy, our mental state, our emotional state, our intuitive state, our spiritual self are all connected. All connected. We call them the koshas.
The koshas, right?
Yeah, the subtle body. So you can, when all of that is aligned, when you're aware that I am all of that, I'm not just some of that, I'm all of that, you can begin a healing process, or recovery. I call it recovery.
Yeah. And then you talked about language, and you're talking about, actually Shelley Prosker, she quoted you, it's a sacred practice to use language, this is in the comments, it's a sacred practice to use language in a healing way, whether or not you're teaching yoga. That's right. That's what you were just saying. I mean, can you talk more about that within, maybe for yoga teachers, the power of language? Can you talk about that?
Language has the power to hurt or to elevate. From my perspective, we are trying to elevate. That's what I think, and that's how I teach it. And so we need to be mindful of the words we choose. And if you're following the yamas and niyamas, if you are following just ahimsa, for example, then you choose language that is, as I said, that elevates. You say the truth with compassion. You don't say the brutal truth. The brutal truth is brutal, and it's not necessary. Sai Baba says, before you speak, ask yourself, is it true? Is it necessary? Is it kind? And does it improve on the silence?
Right. That's a good
And a
one.
lot of it doesn't, as we know.
Right.
And so
Actually,
I
there was a
tell stories in the book also of the misuse of language
Right.
in yoga. It just doesn't just happen in yoga, but that's, the umbrella here. The misuse of language and how harmful that can be, whether you intend it to be or not.
Right.
So we have to be mindful of the words we choose. What is the impact I want to have? What is the impact I'm having? They may not match up. My intention is helpful, but there's a difference between intention and impact. And so we need to be intentional in the way we use language, on and off the mat.
Yeah, and regarding race, it seems particularly important, right? That we are able to talk about race and racism, and do it in a way that is uplifting and furthering the conversation rather than avoiding the conversation, right? You mentioned that earlier, I think.
And I think it's the way I teach in the world is I don't think it's a conversation that we need to be afraid of. And it doesn't have to be. And I know how to teach it that way.
Right.
So you don't have to be afraid, oh my God, what if I make a mistake? I mean, that's something that for white people will say more than black people will say, I don't want to say anything because I might make a mistake. And what I say to that is, you can either be right or you can be in relationship. If you're in relationship, it is likely that you will make a mistake. Everyone who's married knows this. You're in relationship and you step on, I call them those invisible landmines that nobody knows exists, including the person they belong to, blow up. Ooh, I made a mistake, Now what? So we have to learn to repair, which is another learning. There's a skillful use of language and techniques that you can use to learn, okay, how do I repair a rupture when there is one? So to sit back and say nothing, I hear a lot of people saying now, well, I just want to listen. Well, you know what? We've been listening for a long time. It's time to take action, and the action I'm suggesting is let's engage with each other. Let's get to know each other. Not so we can agree with each other, but so that we can understand each other. How do we do that?
That's beautiful, Gail, because I think that's so missing, in our world right now. Everyone has an opinion rather than focusing on the relationship. And I've been married for almost 28 years, so I definitely know what you mean.
Most people listening know what I mean, I'm sure. Yeah. It is work.
It's work.
And you are bound to step on somebody's toes.
Yeah.
And so as you get to know each other, you become mindful of what those areas of sensitivity might be.
Yeah. Also, I just posted about my husband and I had an anniversary just a few weeks ago. It was our anniversary, and someone asked, what's your advice for long-term relationship? And really, without thinking about it, I said, well, we just get over things quickly.
Yeah.
And in a way, it's forgiveness. Having the trust, maybe, that you can make the mistake, like you're saying. That you can make a mistake, and then that you'll still be in it. You'll still be there to make that repair, or that you have the skills. Is that what you said? You have the skills needed?
Well, it's helpful to be skilled in knowing how to repair a relationship rupture, you know, and so just one of the ways to do it, and I think somebody mentioned it, is to validate. In other words, instead of, let's say you say or do something that somebody is deeply offended by or wounded by. The tendency is to, oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't mean it, or to defend, what I did, and explain some more. What you're doing then is making it about you, which is why apologies are never enough. They're never enough. What we need to learn to do, and this is hard, is to validate what the person is telling us. So what I said really hurt your feelings. It really upset you. And it upset you because I guess it was kind of an insensitive thing for me to say. And so it makes sense to me that you would be upset. That's a validation. That feels a lot better than an apology.
Yeah, that's beautiful. There's a comment, Alexis says, I tell my friends it's about making the uncomfortable conversations more comfortable. It takes effort. And then Spiritually in Tuned says the ability to let things go.
Yeah, which is a therapeutic aspect of the practice is when you learn to be still and you learn to notice that, when I'm being still, things come up and they go away. They release. So we would call these the release of our samskaras, for example, in the yoga world. And when that happens, we free up energy and space. We're creating internal space so that a more affirming energy can be present within us. That's called forgiveness. When you haven't forgiven, what you're contracted. You're protecting yourself against more hurt.
Yeah.
And so we have to learn to do that as well, to let go. And one way to learn that, by the way, these are very subtle ways, because people always just say, well, how do I teach this? And I say, well, first you practice it. So for example, people are in Shavasana. All you have to do, is give them the instruction coming out of it, is to extend their arms long back behind them, their legs long in front of them. Take a deep inhale. Exhale. Feel what it's like to let go. Deep inhale. Exhale. Notice how good it feels to let go. And then you do it maybe one more time. And then you just invite people to consider, how can you take this off your mat? So forgiving is letting go.
Yeah.
And it feels good.
That was so beautiful. And actually that reminds me, I wanted to ask you about something you say in the very beginning of the book. You talk about truth and reconciliation and how it's an inside job, and I think that's what you're talking about. It seems to me like, we need to have these hard conversations in the world, but actually, you're saying it really starts inside. Yes. Right?
First look within. Yep.
First look within. And the idea
it's interesting because I've been in communication with a lot of young yogis of color in South Africa. And they're all saying that their truth and reconciliation practices fell apart when Mandela died.
Mm.
So again, it's not enough to just take the action. We have to do our inner work. We have to.
Yeah, that's
if you want
and
permanent change. Otherwise, you get you get changes, but do they stick, and what do they really do? We need shifts in consciousness.
Yeah.
And that's why I think yoga is ideally suited to support those kinds of shifts without being preachy, or you can't tell somebody to shift in consciousness.
Yeah.
But you can invite them into an inner world that will support that. That's our practice, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was just so beautiful. I love that. I love that idea of inner truth and reconciliation.
Inner truth and reconciliation. That's what it is. Yeah. Thank you. I like that too.
I know. It's like that's yoga. It
is.
That's where it starts, and it's like that. It's to me another truth of yoga, that the internal is like a microcosm for the external. And that you can't change things outside unless you've changed them inside.
That's right.
And I feel like that's what you're teaching us. You're teaching us to really work on ourselves. Work on our samskaras, like our inner, the way we've allowed ourselves to think and feel based on training we've received and maybe never analyzed, right?
That's right. Yeah. It's our habitual patterns, our habitual ways of functioning in the world, some of which are functional and some of which are not. And now I think is a time for us to really begin to shift some of our paradigms, that the old ways of being and thinking aren't working anymore. They're just not. And that means it's time to make a change.
It's time to make a change.
It's time to make it. Each of us, we each need to step into that stream of change. We've been catapulted into it, actually. Yeah. The universe said, okay, all right, you're not doing it, I'll help you out a little bit. So now we're all on lockdown and, and stuck with ourselves.
Yeah.
And it is an opportunity to really begin to do some deep self-study, some deep inner reflection.
Right. And you also talk about spiritual activism, and actually I see Anjali Rao's here, who I love. She's a teacher who talks about this a lot too, about yoga as spiritual activism. I wanted to read, can I read a quote from that section? Because of course I jumped ahead to that and read it first.
Great.
Even though I haven't finished the book, because it's what I'm so excited about.
You don't have to read it sequentially.
Okay, thank you. You talk about Gandhi, Martin Luther King Jr., Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa are examples of change agents who were spiritual activists. What they had in common was consciousness of a power greater than themselves, and they engaged in practices that enabled them to face the storms and problems associated with the work they were called to do. They were doing more than trying to affect external change. They each had internal practices that contributed to their individual personal transformation, and that supported awareness, courage, and stamina. They did more than advocate for change. They practiced change from the inside out. By being the change they were advocating for, they demonstrated what they advocated. So I think that's what you're saying now, I guess, that it starts inside. But it still feels like there's work, there is external work that
Absolutely,
counts.
But you cannot be effective as long as you are being reactive, as long as you are triggered by the events that are going on in the world right now. Triggered meaning, when you're triggered, what I mean by that is that you're having a bigger reaction to an event than is, if not necessarily called for, but when you're having a big reaction to something,
like an emotional,
that is not the time to take action. It will not be effective. It will not be helpful. We know that. And so part of what I'm calling spiritual activism is the ability to sit with your discomfort until you understand it well enough to be able to transform it into an action that will elevate the situation and make it better. That takes work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's beautiful. I mean, I think it's almost, to me, it's automatic. It doesn't seem like it even has to be a conscious, you don't have to consciously say, I believe in social justice or whatever. It's just like a natural consequence of being honest with yourself and getting and connecting, that all of a sudden you realize that you feel for others too. Like the more you connect with yourself, maybe the more you feel compassion for people who are also suffering in the world.
Well, in order to be able to sit with people who are suffering, you have to have dealt with your own unbearable pain and suffering.
Yeah.
Because then you know that what the person needs is not for you to do something to fix it, to help them feel better, to change their minds. All we need when in our suffering is the presence of another human being who gets it and just holds the space for us. So while we're going through our suffering, that's hard to do. It's a skill to develop.
Yeah.
I talk about that. It's about practicing presence. Can I be present for someone in their pain and suffering? So one of the challenges of dealing with issues around race and ethnicity is if a person of color, for example, it doesn't even really have to be a person of color. If somebody's coming to you with an issue associated with race and ethnicity, can I be still and hold the space while they're telling me their story? I'll give you an example. This was many, many years ago, and it had nothing to do with asana practice at the time. I was a consultant for a major cable company. And I was called in to do, in those days we called it diversity training.
Right.
That's what we called it then. This is in the 80s, I think. So I was called in to do this training for this staff of people. And we're sitting in a sharing circle, and one of the young men revealed, I'll never forget this, we were in Chattanooga, Tennessee, revealed that he had grown up in the family of Klan, the Ku Klux Klan. That was how he grew up. And his parents would take him to rallies, and he's describing this whole thing. And I remember his boss, the one who brought me in, said, "How in the heck did you get him to share that?" I didn't. But that was his story.
Yeah.
That was his story. I wasn't going to shut him down. I wasn't going to try and moralize about any of that. It wasn't my place. It was my place to make the environment safe enough for everyone to show up authentically. Yeah. And he did, and so did everybody else. And it was a mixed group, by the way. Yeah. So nobody attacked him because I'm holding the boundary here.
Yeah.
So we heard his story. It's like, whoa.
Yeah.
What was that like?
That's amazing. Well, it's amazing that you could hold that space in life.
Well, that I can do it because I have done the work, the inner work.
Yeah, I think that reminds me of teaching, what I think of as accessible yoga, when you have people with all kinds of disabilities, and the work I've done with people who are dying. My work started with people with AIDS. I mean, my background is an AIDS activist, and I worked volunteered in the AIDS hospice for many years, and that's where I learned yoga. Basically, like the real yoga was being with people who are sick and dying.
Yes.
And what is your job in that situation? What is the job of a yoga teacher or I guess a space holder, you're not going to go heal somebody, but you can still offer your presence.
That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. I think let's see if I can. I will not. I'm looking at my book. I won't be able to find it because. Oh wait, it says the power of presence. Okay, I'm going to read this. Hold on. I will not. The most powerful teachers and therapists are those who can model authentic presence and bring it to their work, inviting and allowing another person to have his or her experience just as it is. What a person's wounded places need most is for someone to be there with them. They don't need anyone to diagnose, heal, or fix the problem, to tell them how sorry they are that they got hurt or that everything is going to be all right. They need the full presence of your being, which is itself the healing balm. This is true whether a person's pain is physical or emotional.
Wow, that's beautiful.
So that's why we need to learn to be still and to be comfortable in our stillness and to be comfortable in the discomfort of our own emotional reactions or thoughts when somebody's sharing something painful with us.
That's beautiful. Sarah made a comment, Sarah Blankowski made a comment, that's so pivotal. Can we hold space for folks suffering trauma from racism, creating and holding the space? Then she said, such great work. Your book is so informative and helpful. There's a lot of other positive comments I didn't share with you, but maybe you can check them out later. I'll tag you in there.
Okay.
Anything else you want to share? I don't want to keep you too long. It's been about an hour, and I don't want to take all your time.
Yeah. No, I'm happy that you invited me to share this.
Sorry about the tech issues, but I think it worked out. It's great that people got to see you and hear you clearly. So that was what's important. I feel very grateful that you joined me and, for this book and for your teaching and your presence. It's very healing, actually. I can feel it right now. So thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much. And thank you, everybody who's listening and who cares about this and who is invested in doing the work.
And I can put a link in there for the book and also for, let's see, you have a website?
I do.
Oh, yeah, you do. You have a website. I know I'll put that in there too.
Thank you.
And if you want to add anything, you can go in there and respond to any of those comments later. But I guess we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much, Gail.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Have a great day. Okay.
I will. You too. Bye, everybody.
Take care. Bye.